The next story is from Africa. It's a story that takes place in Zimbabwe a long, long time ago, in a little village that wraps all the way around the rainforest. And in this story, there are two boys who are the same age, and each one is a bit famous in their village for their talent and their abilities. On one end of the village, there's a boy who is a skilled hunter. He makes his own traps, and he's able to go into the rainforest and set his traps in a way that he's able to bring enough food back to not only feed his family, but to other families in the neighborhood. On the other side of town, there's a boy who is blind. He is not able to see, but his other senses are so keen, especially his sense of hearing, that he is able to hear not only what people are saying, but what they are saying under their words with their heart. And he's able to listen to problems that are so complicated, more complicated than a boy would, his age would be able to understand. But he's able to give hope to people that are older than him just by listening to their words. There's a theft in this story. And I love this story because a wrong is made right between the two boys with courageous dialogue. A blind boy catches a bird. A long, long time ago in Zimbabwe, there was a little village that wrapped around the rainforest. And in this village, there were two boys who were the same age who had amazing talents. On one end of the village, there was a boy who was a hunter. He could go into the rainforest and he could follow an animal's tracks. And he was so keen, he could tell you whether the animal was male or female. And he would set his traps in such a way that he was almost always guaranteed to bring back enough food, enough game, to not only feed his family, but other families that lived in his neighborhood. On the other end of town, there was a boy who was blind. But his other senses were so keen, especially his sense of hearing. He would listen to a person talk. And not only would he hear the words that they were actually saying, but he would hear what they were feeling in their heart under their words. And grown-ups started to come to him with very complicated problems that were much too complicated for a young boy to comprehend or even understand. But he would listen so carefully, and he would say, "You say you're mad, but I think you're really sad. You sound like maybe someone has betrayed you." And by listening and by offering what he heard the person say, the person would walk away with a little bit of hope as to that belief that they could solve their own problems. Well, eventually the two boys met, and the blind boy said to the hunter, "You know, I've heard so much about your skill in the rainforest. As a hunter, I would love to go with you and just learn about what you do." Now, the hunter did not want to be responsible for somebody who was blind in the middle of the rainforest, and he thought of an excuse, and he thought, got that over with. Well, eventually they met again, and the blind boy said, I understand that you probably think that I'm not very capable in the rainforest with you, but please give me a chance. Just trust that maybe I can find my way if you have a little bit of help and help me." And he talked to him in such a way that the hunter was persuaded, and it was agreed that they would meet the next morning at a designated time. Now, the night before, the hunter took out two traps. One was his best trap. He always got game in this trap. And he took out a second best trap. It worked most of the time. Once in a while it failed him, but he said, "You know what? I'll let him use this trap." Well, at the designated time, the blind boy came to meet the hunter, and he was carrying a long stick. And the hunter said, "I have two traps here. Whatever is in this trap," and he let the blind boy feel it, "will be mine." And he handed him the second trap, and he said, "Whatever's in this trap will belong to you." And the hunter felt how it worked, and he was very impressed. And he said, "Thank you." And the hunter put both traps on his belt. And the blind boy said, "This is how I need you to help me. I will hold on to the end of the stick, and you hold on to the front of the stick. And if I pull on the stick, 2 pulls, we should stop." Well, it was agreed. And they started walking through the rainforest, and the hunter was pretty amazed. They walked through narrow passageways, and the blind boy followed. And they were walking along, and they had walked for a couple of hours, when all of a sudden the blind boy pulled on the stick, and they stopped. And the hunter turned around, and the blind boy had his fingers to his lips, and he motioned that they should tiptoe ahead, and they did. And when they had passed by just a little bit further, the hunter turned around and said, "Why did you stop us?" And the blind boy turned around and he pointed behind him upwards. And the hunter saw that following the finger upwards, there was a huge jaguar sleeping on a low-hanging branch in the tree that they had walked right underneath. And the hunter said, "How does a boy who lives in darkness see a jaguar?" And the blind boy smiled and he said, "I could see him with my ears. I could hear him snoring." Well, they walked a little bit further, and again the blind boy pulled on the stick, and they stopped. And the hunter turned around. He didn't see anything in front of him. And then all of a sudden, a whole herd of warthogs ran by. And if they had walked further, they might have gotten gored by the tusks of the warthog. And the hunter said, after the warthogs had passed by, "How did you know that these warthogs were there?" And the blind boy smiled and he said, "I could see them with my nose. They let off quite a smell." And they both laughed, and they continued on. And again, a third time, the blind boy pulled on the stick, and they stopped. Just in time, a herd of rhinos were running by, and if they had walked further out of the rainforest, they would have been trampled. And the hunter said, "How did you know?" And the blind boy said, "I could hear them with my feet. I could feel the ground vibrating, and that is how I knew they were ahead." Well, they came to a place near a small little river, and the hunter went to a place where he had seen so many animal tracks before, and he went to a place where he always set his traps, and he took out his best trap in an area where there was a lot of animal tracks, and he set the hairpin trigger on the trap, and he put it in the middle of all the animal tracks, and then he set out to make a fake bush, a camouflage. He took branches and put them together, and when he had finished making the fake bush, the camouflage around the trap, even somebody who was sighted, much less an animal, would ever know that underneath that fake little bush, there was a deadly trap. And then he said, "All right, now we'll set your trap." And they walked further down the stream to an area where there weren't any branches, there weren't any trees, there was just kind of an open space, and the hunter was getting tired, and he thought, he said, "All right, now we'll set your trap." And he took the second trap out, and he set it down. There were no animal tracks at all. And he set the hairpin mechanism, and he was looking around how he was going to find branches and twigs to make a camouflage. And he thought, "Why should I bother? He can't see. He's not going to know whether I do it or not." And he said, "All right, we set your trap. Now let's go home." Well, they walked home, and the blind boy said, "I'm sure we're going to both have things in our trap." And it was agreed that they would meet in the morning. Well, the next morning, the blind boy came over, and he said, "I can't wait to see what we have in our traps." And the hunter thought, "I'm sure I have something." I don't think he will. As they walked closer and closer and closer to the first trap, the blind boy said, "You got something in your trap." And the hunter thought, "I'm sure I do. I always do at that place when I set that trap." And he pulled away the camouflage, and indeed, in his trap there was a brown bird, a guinea fowl, a little bit bigger than a pigeon, enough to feed 2 people. And he opened the trap up, he took the brown bird, he put it in a pouch at his side, snapped the trap to his belt, and said, "All right, now let's check your trap." And as they walked further down, closer and closer to the second trap, the hunter saw in that trap the most exquisite bird. He had never seen a bird like that in all of the time that he spent in the forest. Magenta, orange, blue, yellow, orange. The feathers were exquisite. And when he saw that bird, he wanted it. "I'll get the bird out of the trap for you." He took and opened the trap so he would not damage the feathers. And he took the bird out of the trap. But instead of handing the bird to the blind boy, he took the brown bird out of his pouch. He handed the brown bird to the blind boy. "Here's your bird." The blind boy took the bird, smelled it, touched the chest, touched the feathers. and put it into the pouch on his belt. Oh, now let's go home. We each got our birds. Well, as they were walking home, they stopped to rest in a place where it was a nice, cool breeze. And as they were sitting there, the hunter said, "You know, everybody says you are so smart. They say you can answer any questions and you can help anybody who wants an answer. I got a question or two for you. Maybe you can answer my questions. Tell me this. Why is it that people fight with each other?" And the blind boy looked at him. He looked him in the eye, and with his unseeing eyes he said, "People fight because of what you just did to me. They fight because people make promises and they break them." The hunter felt so ashamed. He reached into his pouch. He took out that exquisite bird. He reached over and he picked up the blind boy's hand and put it around the bird. And he reached over and he took his other hand and he put it around the bird and he gently pushed it towards him. The blind boy took the bird, felt the feathers and the wings, and smiled. And the hunter said, "How do people become friends after they have fought?" And the blind boy said, "They do just what you have done. They do the right thing." And do you know, those two became friends for the rest of their lives. And it was said in that village that the hunter, he would introduce his blind friend, even when he was an old man and they both had canes. He would put his arm around him and he'd say, "My best friend in the world, he will never see you with his eyes, but this good man, he will always see you with his